Here's a free idea for a PhD thesis that you can write yourself. Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. So about 3 years ago, I've made a video, Music of Memes, which I'm gonna link in the description, as some others, well, at least one other that I will mention here. And in this video, I've described how modern means of communication, like fast multimedia transfer, etc., like video streaming, etc., etc., impacts our language. And in particular, even more in particular, I've said that I call this process, one of the two processes actually, naturalization. And what it means is that it brings language, I mean these new possibilities, technological possibilities, bring new sort of bring our means of communication closer to the most natural language, and the most natural language is gesture, in my opinion at least. And here, in this video, I wish to talk about sort of a backwards process, sort of a blowback or recoil, or however you wish to call it, when actually the verbal language receives feedback from this high-speed multimedia type of media, right? So this is what we're going to be talking about here. And one example, or rather several, or at least one, let's start with one, is Twitch emotes sort of appearing in verbal language of people who actually watch Twitch every now and then at least, right? So Twitch emotes verbalized in spoken language, right? This is the one example of this phenomenon of feedback from multimedia, in Twitch in particular, into the verbal language. And how does it work? Well, you just literally verbalize the name of the Twitch emote. Like, what is an emote? It's like an emoji, but for Twitch, right? Something like that. So Twitch is a streaming website where basically people play games, and a lot of people watch them playing games, and they chat, and the streamer interacts with the chat, etc., etc. Well, not only games, actually, later it obviously developed into some other things, if you know what I mean, actually including gambling among other things, but these other things that you thought about as well. So, and how does it work? Well, for example, you say 5 head, and it's an emote, its name, it's how you spell it to actually post it in the chat, right? And what it is, it's like a guy with a big head, and it means like, the meaning of it is like, oh, it's a very smart move. Sometimes ironically, actually most of the time I think it's used ironically, like it's actually a very stupid move. Or I don't know, like, je baited. So it's like a guy watching like that, like, and smiling. So what it means is that when it is used, is like when a streamer asks a question to their chat, and the chat deliberately like misleads them, like gives them a wrong answer, right? So just to make fun of them, right? So they were baited, but not just baited, but je baited, you know. Or Kappa, there's like this slightly greening guy, and there's like hundreds of them, and people, like some people at least, actually use that in like verbal language, at least in this sort of more or less young internet community, right? Okay, so that's how it works inherently in this example at least, but you see the pattern, right? There's something going on clearly. Some big process is occurring, I think. So sometimes it can lead to like recognizable phrases, but with like unnatural grammar, you know, like again, some streamer like literally verbally might say during the stream, like, oh, this team is only a level behind copium. Like, what the hell is that? Like, how would you understand this? Well, copium is another sort of meme, which means like, well, it's an amalgam of cope and opium. It's like a drug that gives you cope, right? That allows you to cope with something bad. So if they say only a level behind copium, it's like, okay, this team is a level behind, which is very bad. They're kind of losing the game. But yeah, let's try to find some cope in this, right? Something like that. Let's try to cope with it. So that's how it works, essentially. And these are my examples for you. Or it can be also exemplified by phrases from like mimetic pictures used in verbal language, which actually could be meaningless in themselves, like phrases, but they still reference you to this larger node of culture, and hence become colorful and meaningful. And like, I can give you examples from my personal life, like when we gather with friends. Unfortunately, it happens very rarely these days, but when we do, like, we sometimes actually speak in like memes, you know, which is actually very funny sometimes. Sometimes it's kind of lame, but sometimes it becomes pretty funny when you take a meme, like some famous mimetic phrase, and you sort of use it in this particular situation. Like, you exchange certain words there, usually nouns, for something fitting to this particular situation, and it makes it super hilarious, actually. I won't give you any particular examples. Most likely all of them would be very offensive, so but anyway, so yeah, and why is it funny, by the way, is again, in this video Music of Memes, I've examined the nature of humor, so you may look into that, where I talked about, actually I'm almost directly quoting Nietzsche there, that humor comes when this fear is being overcome by being basically removed, right? So what is fear is this new situation, new place of dialogue where we're arrived at, and a familiar thing that relieves this tension is this meme that we utilize to sort of diffuse it, right? Well, it's like sort of like we're bringing our old friend, our old meme to save us, right? Something like that. And it makes it, this new and dangerous situation, kind of funny. I mean, dangerous, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but it's a very, very diluted case of danger, right? Something new. It's always like that. Okay. Or these phrases may have meaning, but they're still kind of wonky, you know, and they are like that because they reference some popular mimetic pattern. For example, one of these, like, I don't know, like, this feeling when, you know, and blank, you know, insert your whatever, and some picture. So you might say in your everyday life, like in some situation, this feeling when your friend, blah, 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 something, did something to you. I don't know. Even though normal people don't speak like that, obviously, right? So it's a clear influence from the internet. So a normal person would say, shit, that sucks that this guy did this, right? You know, something like that. Or I feel bad about this, you know, not this feeling when your friend, blah, blah, blah. Like, this sounds really lame in terms of regular verbal language. Actually, not lame, it sounds strange. It's like you're actually speaking different language in the first place, and you use like Google Translate or something. Okay. Yeah, so what are the properties of this situation we're in with regards to all of that? Well, interestingly, this makes this sort of newspeak pretty restrictive, right? So, because in order to understand what the person is saying, you need to know the original, right? Otherwise, you won't get the reference and possibly even miss the meaning of what is being said. So yeah, and it kind of resembles how we've had previously the elites, you know, speaking different languages with respect to their people. Like the Roman elite often spoken Greek, you know, the Russian elites spoke French, like in 19th century and even early 20th century. And actually I've given those examples in Music of Memes as well, I think. But anyway, so yeah, it's like makes you a foreign language speaker almost, right? And what's kind of horrifying, okay, we'll return to this in a minute, but let me note this thing, that various like encoded and secret languages have been around for a while, obviously, right? But now global communication and the internet creates this paradoxical situation where we have these isolated cultural bubbles, like the bubble of Twitch emotes or something, to like all this Twitch communication culture, let's say. But these bubbles are embedded into a virtually transparent structure, right? So we have this transparent substrate of internet, and suddenly like very isolated, very I don't know, specialized bubbles grow on it or something like that, right? And yeah, it's kind of paradoxical in itself. And in this situation, subculture in each separate bubble of this sort becomes the norm, actually, right? And I don't know, but it's kind of unattractive, I would say. It's really like you know, the Tower of Babel kind of situation where we're separating again, you know. And once you enter one of these bubbles, you are like, where am I? Like, what the hell are these people talking about? Like, what? So it's pretty unattractive, I believe, to old school people, sort of, like myself. I'm kind of generalizing my own experience, but I think that others may feel something like that as well. So, and I feel often that I need to take a shower after visiting, you know, some Twitch stream or some Discord server or something like that. Or, you know, some specialized websites, if you know what I mean. Because all of them have their own terminology, their own, like, patterns of communication, right? Including all the use of these local memes and things like that. And yeah, and it's kind of horrifying, I would say. In a way, not horrifying, more like disgusting, I would say. There's really nothing super scary about it. It's just, I don't know, unpleasant. I would call it that. So obviously, it all has made possible. Actually, not quite that, but it's probably a part, or at least it's parallel to this more general phenomenon of how Web 2.0 has allowed us to create these bubbles in terms of like information, like, you know, echo chambers, proverbial, like, we have proverbial algorithms, you know, so your YouTube is very different from my YouTube because our interests are different. We put our likes on different videos, we share different videos, and therefore we search for different videos, we watch different videos, and therefore our recommendations would be different, our news feed would be different, etc., etc. So your bubble is different from mine. They may like cross in some, you know, area, but they're still different, you know, in other respects. So this situation, obviously, and it's not only YouTube, obviously, it's any social network, it leads to polarization and isolation, right? So it's not anything new. I mean, this has been said almost like already like 10 years ago. People were talking about this, right? And probably even more than that. So yeah, and when I'm saying like polarization and isolation, I also mean that in politics, the most obvious example, but in culture in general, right? in terms of spheres of influence and spheres of interest of consumers, let's say. It's kind of a nasty word in this context. Well, people, right? So, yeah, this is what we have. And that's mostly what I wanted to talk about. Well, okay, let me bring like semi-conclusions to this. Again, I don't think there is some ill will behind this process. I think it's spontaneous and understandable inherently. And again, well, why would people choose to listen to or watch or read something they don't like, right? So they would choose something they do like, and that would inherently polarize it more and more and more, right? Their echo chamber. Because everything that they don't like basically don't exist for them, which is like 99% of everything on the internet, right? Even more than that. So, yeah. So they only observe this 1% of the internet, which may interest them. Less than 1%, obviously. But this is the situation we're in. Okay. And one, like, semi-final note I wanted to make, actually maybe final note, is that there is an interesting offshoot in language per se, like verbal language per se, of this general process where English plays a role of this, I don't know, like big influencer, right, on other languages, where other languages often use English phrases or English words directly as they are, or like with slight modifications required by the grammar of this language, and just use them like that, right, in their speech. Like, again, in gaming world, it's very, very prominent because nobody cares usually to actually translate the terms from the game properly into the respective languages, right? Well, I don't mean like proper localizations, but if people play English versions of games, which I usually do, for example, like they don't have any versions of these terms in their language, or at least it wouldn't be understandable what you're talking about even, right? So when I say like, okay, let me give you an example. Like, let's say there's a game where my character is stunned by another character. It's like they've casted some ability on me and I'm stunned, right? So in Russian, I might say, меня застанили, right? So you hear this root stun, right? Even though in Russian, proper term would be оглушили, меня оглушили. So, меня застанили versus меня оглушили. It sounds very different, right? Because меня застанили is just a direct blueprint copy from the English term stun. I'm stunned, right? Or it can be, and it happens in other languages as well, as far as I could see. So, not only in terms of words themselves, but sometimes this copying happens in terms of whole phrases, like, or grammatical structures at least, like the English idiom. Is it an idiom? I don't know, I'm not a linguist. Made my day, like literally people say in Russian, сделала мой день, which is like literally like translation of all these words one by one, and it makes no sense in Russian, like absolutely, well, it kind of makes some sense, but it's kind of super wonky and not properly sounding, let's say. But people do that. People do say that in Russian. So yeah. And again, I think it happens in other languages as well, but I can't give you examples because I'm not that familiar with like modern culture of other countries, let's say, in terms of what language do they use. All right. So let's conclude this rant. We've talked about how new means of communication bleed back, sort of make a recoil into verbal language, and how it makes a certain like cultural bubbles marginalized or subculturized, right? And only like fitting for certain groups of people, right? And it inherently leads to sort of subdivision of the internet into these smaller pockets at the very least. So, if you're into linguistics or sociology or culturology or some stuff like that, here's a free idea for a PhD thesis that you can write yourself, where I can basically outline the points for you already, right? So you need to study this process in more detail, give some examples, analyze and categorize them, and in the final chapter, maybe like evaluate the possible impact of it on the society, and possible future developments, right? Something like that. I feel like I'm too generous because I've already given you another idea for a PhD thesis, also like basically written down completely for you, for free completely, and also in the same areas like linguistics, sociology, culturology, and it was in the video Two Faces of Scientific Communication, and I'll link this part of the video where I talk about the thesis in the description as well. Alright, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.